This week we're changing things up, prepared to be amazed by 10 incredible literary facts and anecdotes. From Victor Hugo's quite unusual method of finishing The Hunchback of Notre Dame to the reason why Dostoevsky wrote The Gambler. These stories reveal some fascinating secrets behind the stories, the books and the authors. Join me as we uncover some incredible tales behind the books that you love. And why not, let's kick things off with this clever device, the Nyctograph. A very strange but useful invention by none other than Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll wasn't just an author, he also was a creative thinker, an inventor and a mathematician. And he hated it if he woke up in the middle of the night with a bright idea and then he had to fumble around in the dark for about half an hour before he could light a candle and write things down. And to solve this problem, Carroll invented the Nyctograph in 1891. The Nyctograph is basically a grid-like template, and it allows you to write in the dark without needing any light. It's nothing more than just a card with about 16 rectangular outcuts, which guide your hand while writing in the dark. It allowed him to note down his midnight thoughts easily without waking anyone else up. And yes, if you're wondering, parts of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland were written totally in the dark. And although the Nyctograph never really caught on, it still has some fans today and there are still people that are using it. So the next time you want to learn a new skill, why not learn to use the Nyctograph? Then imagine a novel by one of the most iconic authors of the 20th century, Sylvia Plath, that you'll never be able to read. This is the mystery of Sylvia Plath's lost novel, Double Exposure, a book that could have shed some new light on her talent, her troubled life and her very disastrous relationship. Now, Sylvia Plath is of course best known for her novel The Bell Jar. But few people know that before her untimely death in 1963, Sylvia Plath was working on another novel, Double Exposure. This book was supposed to be an exploration of her somewhat troubled and tumultuous marriage to the poet Ted Hughes. And while The Bell Jar was a fictional account of her mental struggles, this book was going to be the real thing. This book was going to be all about her husband cheating on her. But here's where the mystery deepens. Double Exposure has never been found. The manuscript was lost under strange circumstances and many believe that it was her husband who just made it disappear, because it made him look bad. Others, however, do speculate that it could still be in existence, hidden somewhere in a private collection waiting to be unearthed. And Sylvia Plath isn't the only author to have work vanish. We know, for example, that Hemingway's first novel wasn't really his first novel. His actual first novel, which was all about his own experiences in World War I, was simply binned because he thought it wasn't good enough. And we also know that there was a very early Shakespearean play called Carradino that simply was lost to the ages. So, if you sometimes worry about all the books you still have to read, well, think about all the books you'll never read. And talking about Ernest Hemingway, well, he was of course known for many things. His iconic novels, his adventures, his larger-than-life persona, his really bad manners towards women. But one lesser-known fascination of this iconic author was cats. And in particular, polydactyl cats. Cats with an extra toe. Now, Hemingway's love affair with these unique feline creatures started somewhere in the 1930s. He was gifted a white polydactyl cat called Snow White by a ship's captain. Now, for Hemingway, who lived in Key West at the time, Snow White wasn't just an ordinary pet. In maritime tradition, these six-toed cats were believed to be exceptional mouse catchers, the ideal companion for any seafarer and adventurer like Hemingway. Now, it won't surprise you that Hemingway wasn't the most responsible of pet owners. So he allowed his cat to roam around Key West and the island because it simply couldn't go anywhere. So, if you travel to Key West today and you go to the Hemingway estate and the Hemingway Museum, you can see that all of the cats there, and probably most of the cats on the island, are indeed descendants of Snow White. Nearly 50 cats, and many of them with 6 toes, are still living in the estate. They are part of his legacy to the island, and they are still lovingly cared for today by vets and volunteers. Hemingway admired their uniqueness, their independence and their resilience. And in a way, they even outlived him. Authors and deadlines are nothing new, but it was the iconic author, Victor Hugo, who had a very drastic measure of making sure that he lived up to his deadlines. The year is 1830 and Victor Hugo is writing The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In fact, he's lagging. His publisher is putting constant pressure on him to finally finish the book. So Victor Hugo devises a rather unusual plan to make sure that he meets his deadline. He collects all of his clothes, even the ones that he's wearing, and locks them away, giving the key to a friend. Being stark naked, except for a long grey shawl, actually prevented him from going out and becoming distracted. The only thing he could do was sit at his desk and be focused on his writing. It is said that this extreme isolation finally allowed him to just get in there, get in the zone, and finish the book on time. Within a few months, The Hunchback of Notre Dame would become his all-time masterpiece, and it was all worth it in the end. It's a pretty wild method, but hey, at least it worked. And then let's talk about another iconic writer, Vladimir Nabokov. Now, Vladimir Nabokov is of course best known for masterpieces such as Lolita and Pale Fire, but there was another passion in his life that rivaled his love of writing, and that's butterflies. Nabokov wasn't just a talented author, he was also a renowned lepidopterist, or butterfly expert. Nabokov's fascination with butterflies started really early on in his life when he was still living in Russia. He would go out into the fields and catch butterflies all over and study them, draw them, preserve them and pin them in books. And what started as a hobby became something far more profound. He became quite the expert at butterfly taxonomy, and when he moved to the United States, he even made his job out of it. He took a position at the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard, where he started to study a butterfly group called the Blues. And his scientific work turned out to be groundbreaking. Nabokov devised his theory about butterfly migration, but his work was largely dismissed by the scientific community, so he turned to writing. However, decades later, Nabokov was proven right, and it is astonishing to think that the man who gave us a book like Lolita could very well have never written it because he was studying butterflies. Now I hope you're enjoying this video, and before we dive into the next mind-blowing fact, do hit that like button and do subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps support the channel and it helps me bring more amazing literary content your way. And now, let's keep the surprises coming. Imagine a library that spans over a century, where new books are not just being written, but also carefully preserved for the future generations. This ambitious vision is embodied in the Future Library. Launched in 2014 in Oslo, Norway, the Future Library is a library that aims to create 100 new literary masterpieces that will not be published until 2114. That's right, 100 new books you and I will never get to read. This crazy project is located in a serene forest just out of Oslo, where 1,000 trees were planted for making just new books. Each year, a famous acclaimed author is invited to hand in a manuscript, a book that was never published before, and it is stored in a specifically designed wooden room somewhere in the forest. These are books not written for current audiences, but for future audiences. It has been going on for some years now already, and we already seen manuscripts being handed in by authors like Margaret Atwood. These hidden manuscripts will be unveiled and published in 2114, but alas, I don't think I'll be making a video on them. For you and me, this will always be a future library. And then let's talk book bans. Now, according to my own opinion, book bans, although very much a thing again today, are quite silly. History, though, teaches us that some book bans are sillier than others. Let's take The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, for example. Yes, this classic novel has seen censorship because of his portrayal of age, of gender, of race, but one of the more sillier reasons why this book got banned in several schools is because one of the characters is a smoker. That's right, the idea, the notion that Huck's occasional cigarette might influence children to take up smoking stirred parents into action. They demanded that this book, this vile book, was banned from the school library. And so was Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Now, you might think that this childhood staple, this heartwarming tale of a friendship between a pig and a spider, is a very innocent story. Well, clearly not. According to many complaints, this book was a dangerous precedent. This book might make children too emotionally attached to farm animals. Rural communities saw all kinds of problems originating from teaching children to have compassion with pigs. So this book had to be banned. And another dangerous book, another book clearly out to corrupt our children, was Shel Silverstein's A Light in the Attic. Now again, you might think that this is a very innocent, humorous book of silly poems that lets children in on the joke. Well, think again. Because according to some parents in Wisconsin, this book is far more than that. They managed to get A Light in the Attic banned because of its fifth poem, How Not to Have to Dry the Dishes. This clearly monstrous poem, at least according to the ban, encourages children to break the dishes so they don't have to dry them. And it gets even worse. A year later, again in Wisconsin, another school had to ban this book. This time, parents believed that it glorified Satan, promoted cannibalism, and encouraged children to be disobedient. Now that sounds like a children's book I would read. And lastly, we have Where's Waldo by Martin Handford. Yes, believe it or not, even this iconic search and find book was banned in some libraries after parental concerns. Some parents believed that searching for Waldo indeed encouraged unproductive and silly behavior in their children. I don't believe that's the real reason though. The real reason emerges in another Where's Waldo book ban. The real reason is something you can find on page 4, the beach scene. That's right, on page 4 in the original Where's Waldo, after some searching you can't just find Waldo, you can also find a nude sunbather. I think I'm starting to understand why these books are ever so popular. And then it is time to unmask a mystery author. If you have seen my video on the New York Times 100 best books of all times, you might have seen that all the way at the top at number 1 there was Elena Ferrante. Now Elena Ferrante is a name that hasn't just captivated readers all over the world with poignant storytelling and very psychological analysis of the human context. No, Elena Ferrante has been a bit of a mystery themselves. For years, Ferrante's true identity has been a mystery, a secret, creating this almost mysterious atmosphere around the author. But in 2016, that mystery was shattered. Or was it? The first attempt to uncover her identity was done in 2016. Marco Santagata, an Italian novelist and literature professor, said that he had studied and analyzed the handwriting, the style, the syntax of Ferrante's books, and that he knew who the author was. He identified Elena Ferrante as a Neapolitan professor, Marcella Marmo. But the thing is, both her publisher, her agent, and Marmo herself denied of being Ferrante. So the quest continued. A few months later, in the same year, an investigative reporter, Claudio Gatti, dives into the finances. He claimed that through financial records and royalty payments and real estate actions that he finally identified who Ferrante was. A Rome-based translator by the name of Anita Raya. He published his articles in many newspapers in Germany and Italy and got an enormous backlash. Fans and professionals all over the world joined in the defense of someone's right to be anonymous. His articles were criticized as a violation of privacy. On the other side, Gatti and many others defended these articles because they said that by writing these novels, Ferrante had relinquished any rights to privacy and anonymity ever again. But it was never really confirmed if this identity was the real one. A few months later, a very notorious Italian prankster, Tomasi De Benedetti, he claimed that he had an interview where Anita Raya actually admitted being Ferrante. This, however, was denied by Ferrante's publisher, who claimed that this interview was clearly fake. And it was indeed proven to be so. So, finally, in 2017, a large group of scholars and linguists and computer analysts came together and started analyzing over 150 novels that were originally written in Italian by 40 different authors, including Ferrante. Their conclusion? Ferrante isn't Anita Raya, but might very well be Anita's husband. Ferrante herself, however, has repeatedly refuted any suggestions that she might be a man. To be continued. And then we have to talk about a funeral. Le Train de Nulle Part, The Train to Nowhere, is a book that takes place on a train. It features some very flowery prose and frilly language, and instead of any action, the narrator of the book just describes and criticizes passengers on this train. And this literary journey is supposed to be a reminder that, just like the train, language is something that is always on the move and always moves forward. The thing about this book, however, is that it doesn't have any verbs in it. That's right, no verbs at all, because this book was written by the author under a pseudonym of Michel Thaler as part of his personal crusade against the verb. He claims that the verb is an invader, a usurper and a dictator of our literature. And yes, the book is just a part of his personal crusade. At one point he even staged a funeral to ceremonially bury the verb once and for all. The eulogy, however, had verbs in it. The verb is like a weed in a field of flowers. You have to get rid of it to allow the flowers to grow and flourish. Take away the verbs and language speaks for itself. This mock funeral for the verb was held at Paris University, the Sorbonne, and even more than 300 people attended the funeral. Now imagine sending invitations for a funeral without using verbs. And then for our last literary fact of the day, we have to talk Dostoevsky. Now, of course, we all know Fyodor Dostoevsky as the author of books like Crime and Punishment. Now, Dostoevsky wasn't the dedicated author like Victor Hugo. In fact, he had hobbies. And at one point, because of these hobbies, Dostoevsky found himself in a bit of a tight spot. He had gambled away all of his money, he was left destitute, and he had a fast approaching deadline for his newest novel, The Gambler. And if he was to miss this deadline, he was about to lose all of the future rights to his own work. Talk about high stakes. So, to get this done, he hired a stenographer and promised to pay her later on. Together they worked tirelessly, day and night, to finish the novel, The Gambler, in less than a month. Just in time, they managed to finish the novel, and finally Dostoevsky got to earn some money again. So, did Anna Schnitkina get paid? Well, in a way more than she actually expected to be. Not long after this month of isolation, the two got married. I guess the house doesn't always win. And there you have it. 10 mind-blowing literary facts that you just can't believe. Let me know down below in the comments which fact that surprised you the most, or perhaps you have a fact of your own. Let me know down below and we'll talk literary facts some more. But don't go just yet. Why not click right here and join me in decoding the secret formula behind Agatha Christie's books.